Quinton Raye didn't own a clock, but his body didn't need one. Years of scraping by had trained him like a fighter's muscle memory, up at 5 a.m., no alarm required. He rose slowly from the flattened futon cushion that served as his bed, its faded green fabric sagging against the scuffed hardwood floor of his friend Corey's one-bedroom apartment in Tulsa. The place wasn't his, not really, but for the past 4 months, it had been the only roof he could count on. The air was cool, carrying the faint must of old carpet and the lingering tang of last night's takeout. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant hum of a neighbor's air conditioner kicking on. Quinton moved with quiet purpose, his bare feet padding softly across the floor. In the cramped kitchen, he flicked on the stove, its electric coil glowing a faint orange. He set a rusted kettle over the flame, not for coffee, there wasn't any, but for steam. He needed just enough to press his only button-up shirt, a pale blue Oxford with a frayed collar and a missing cuff button. If you ironed it just right, it could pass for professional, like it belonged in an office instead of a thrift store bin. He didn't complain, Quinton never did. Complaints didn't pay bills, didn't land interviews, and didn't fill the 2-year gap on his resume that started the day his mom passed and ended with an eviction notice taped to his apartment door. He worked the iron carefully, the hiss of steam filling the kitchen like a sigh. The shirt smelled faintly of lavender from the cheap detergent he'd used, and the warm, damp air curled around him, carrying a fleeting memory of his mom pressing his school clothes years ago. He shook the thought away and moved to his shoes, black leather, cracked along the sides but still holding together. He dabbed a rag in a saucer of cooking oil, rubbing it into the leather until it caught a faint, respectable shine. Interview at 10. Don't be late, he muttered, catching his reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. His eyes, a deep brown, looked tired but determined, framed by a face that hadn't seen a proper barber in months. By 7:30, he was out the door, a half-eaten granola bar stuffed in his pocket, its wrapper crinkling faintly. Bus fare jingled in his other pocket, coins borrowed from Mr. Lawton, the retired veteran downstairs who spent his days glued to old westerns, the volume cranked so high the gunshots echoed through the thin walls. Quinton had promised to pay him back the moment he got hired, and Mr. Lawton had just waved a hand, muttering, "Don't worry, kid. Just don't miss that bus." It was a cool October morning in Tulsa, the sky still bruised with dawn, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. Quinton walked to the bus stop with his head up, shoulders squared, his resume folder tucked under one arm. He'd read somewhere, maybe on a job site, that how you carry yourself matters more than what's on paper. So he walked like a man with options, not like someone who hadn't seen a steady paycheck in over a year. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional rumble of a delivery truck or the chatter of early joggers. The air smelled of damp leaves and exhaust, and Quinton's breath fogged faintly as he rehearsed his lines with every step. What are your strengths? I'm dependable. I show up. I care. What's your biggest weakness? I don't ask for help, even when I need it. Why do you want this job? Because I want to build something I can be proud of. The building came into view just before 9:30, its glass panels glinting in the morning light. DuPont Grove's Tulsa branch wasn't a towering skyscraper like the ones on TV, but its sleek lines and polished exterior still felt like a world apart from Quinton's reality. He straightened his tie, a faded navy strip he'd found at a thrift store, and crossed the street, his heart thumping like a bass line. This was it. His last shot, but just before the crosswalk, something caught his eye. A woman, elegant and out of place on this gritty corner of Elm and 14th, was stuck, literally stuck. One of her sleek black heels had lodged deep in a jagged crack between the sidewalk panels. She balanced a designer tote in one hand, a coffee cup in the other, her posture rigid with frustration. Cars slowed, some honked, their drivers gawking as she tugged at her foot, her face a mix of irritation and embarrassment. She wore a navy trench coat over a silk blouse, her hair a flawless chestnut bob that gleamed under the streetlights. Late 30s, maybe older, she carried herself like someone who commanded boardrooms, not sidewalks. Quinton's pocket buzzed, his phone, probably a reminder he'd set for the interview. He ignored it. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "Need a hand?" he asked, crouching before she could answer. Up close, she smelled faintly of jasmine perfume, and her coffee cup bore the logo of a downtown cafe he'd never stepped foot in. She glanced down, startled, her green eyes narrowing slightly. I don't know what happened," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. Her voice carried a faint edge of panic, the kind people use when they're trying to seem in control. "This is ridiculous." "No worries," Quinton said, his voice steady as he gripped the base of her heel. "You're stuck right in the crack. Got it deep, too." He worked carefully, feeling the rough concrete under his fingers, the heel's leather warm from her body heat. She braced herself against a nearby pole, her tote swinging slightly. "Watch the cars," she muttered, more to herself. "I swear, people drive like maniacs down here." Quinton chuckled, shifting the heel side to side. "Yeah, they don't slow down unless there's sirens." The shoe wouldn't budge at first, wedged tight, the rubber sole starting to peel at the edges. She grimaced, glancing at it. "I just bought these. 5th pair this month." "5th?" Quinton said, raising an eyebrow as he worked. "I've had these shoes since junior year of high school. Can't imagine going through 5 in a month." His tone was light, but his hand stayed focused, twisting gently. She paused, her expression softening as she looked at him, really looked. "You in a rush?" He hesitated. A part of him wanted to blurt out that he had an interview, that he was cutting it close, that this could be his only shot. But instead, he said, "Sort of. But I'm not leaving you stuck here." With one final twist, the heel popped free. She stumbled slightly, and he caught her elbow, steadying her just in time. "There we go," he said, standing and brushing the dust off his pants. "Thank you," she exhaled, adjusting her shoe and smoothing her coat. "Seriously, I thought I'd have to yank my foot out and go barefoot. That'd be one way to make an entrance." Her smile was real now, warm and unguarded. "What's your name?" "Quinton," he said, wiping his hands on his slacks. "Quinton Raye." "Well, Quinton Raye, thank you. I owe you one." She checked her watch, a slim gold band that caught the light, and winced. "I'm late myself." Without another word, she turned, weaving through the morning crowd with a stride that parted bodies like water. Just like that, she was gone. Quinton glanced at his own watch, a cheap digital one he'd gotten at a gas station. 9:54, his chest tightened. The interview was at 10. He ran, dodging a delivery truck and clutching his resume folder as he burst through the glass doors of DuPont Grove. The lobby was all polished marble and soft lighting, the kind of place that made you feel small if you didn't belong. He forced a smile, trying to hide the sweat beading on his forehead. "Hi," he said, slightly out of breath. "I'm here for an interview with DuPont Grove. 10 o'clock, name's Quinton Raye." The receptionist, a young woman with a tight bun and a nameplate reading Clara, looked at him, then at her computer screen. She clicked a few times, her expression polite but distant. "I'm sorry, Mr. Raye. Ms. Ames was only scheduled until 10 o'clock. She's already stepped out." Quinton blinked, the words not quite sinking in. "Wait, can you check? I helped someone on the street, it was just a few minutes, she left about 5 minutes ago," Clara said, her tone final. "I'm sorry." He stood there, the folder suddenly heavy in his hand, like it was mocking him. His breath came shallow, but he swallowed the urge to argue, to explain. He forced the same practiced smile he'd used in the mirror. "Thank you." The Tulsa morning felt louder now, the buses roaring past, the sun burning hotter on his neck. He sank onto a bench across from the building, the resume folder resting on his knees. For a moment, he let the thought creep in, maybe I blew it. Maybe I should have kept walking. But then he saw her face again, the woman's embarrassed grimace, the way no one else had even slowed down. His hands were still sweating, his stomach empty except for that half-eaten granola bar, but he told himself, doing the right thing doesn't always pay off. But it's still right. Quinton stayed on the bench for nearly an hour, watching suits stream in and out of the building like it was just another Tuesday. He imagined the office he'd never see, the chair he'd never sit in, the words he'd rehearsed but never got to say. The folder felt like dead weight now, a prop for a play that had already ended. Eventually, he stood, adjusted his shirt, and walked 3 blocks to a corner store where Mr. Lawton's cousin, a wiry man named Reggie, worked the register. With his last $2, Quinton bought a bottle of off-brand water and a gas station sandwich wrapped in plastic that tasted like cardboard and regret. Back at the apartment, Mr. Lawton was asleep in his recliner, mouth open, the TV blaring a news segment about a grain shortage in Kansas. Quinton didn't wake him. He leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the chipped linoleum, replaying the morning until it felt like a bruise. When Corey came home from his diner shift, Quinton gave a thumbs up and mumbled, "Interview went fine." He didn't want sympathy, didn't want Corey's well-meaning cliches about meant to be or your time will come. He just wanted silence, but silence wasn't peace, not when his thoughts kept looping back to the crosswalk, to the woman, to the what-ifs. That night, he lay on the futon, hands behind his head, listening to the pipes creak and the neighbor's dog barking until the sky turned gray. He checked his email the next morning out of habit, nothing. By lunch, still nothing. By the second day, he stopped refreshing. He knew how this worked. They didn't call people who showed up late, no matter the story. They hired the guy with the pressed suit, the laptop bag, the 5-minute early arrival. He started scouring job boards again, overnight stalker at a grocery chain, part-time janitor at a private school, even a gig washing cars at a dealership. Anything that meant forward motion. But on Thursday afternoon, his phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the cracked screen. He thought it might be a telemarketer or someone asking about the rusty bike he'd listed on Marketplace months ago. He let it ring twice, then answered. "Hello." A pause. "Is this Mr. Quinton Raye?" The voice was crisp, professional, his throat tightened. "Speaking. This is Alora Finch, assistant to Ms. Marion DuPont. Ms. DuPont would like to reschedule your interview for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp, at the same location. She'll be conducting it herself." Quinton stood so fast he knocked over a kitchen chair, the clatter echoing in the tiny apartment. "Wait, did you say, she wants to?" "That's correct," Alora said, unfazed. "Is that time okay with you?" "Yeah, absolutely, yes." "Wonderful. You'll check in with the front desk when you arrive." The line clicked dead before he could ask why or how. Quinton stood frozen, phone still pressed to his ear, heart pounding. Mr. Lawton, woken by the noise, raised a bushy eyebrow from his recliner. "You all right, son?" Quinton looked at him, a real smile breaking through. "I think so, Mr. Lawton. I think something just turned around." He didn't sleep that night, but for a different reason. His mind was electric, replaying the crosswalk, the woman's fleeting smile, the way she'd vanished without a name. She remembered me. How? He hadn't looked polished, shirt wrinkled from sweat, tie slightly crooked. All he'd had was sincerity, and somehow, that had been enough. By 6 a.m., he was ready. Shirt re-ironed with the kettle trick, shoes shined with cooking oil, cuffs stitched with a borrowed needle and thread from the corner laundry shop. Nothing fancy, but it held. Corey insisted on driving him, jingling his keys. "No bus today. You're walking in on time and breathing normal. I got gas and half a granola bar for luck." The drive took 10 minutes, Quinton silent the whole way, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. At 8:50, he stood in the DuPont Grove lobby, heart thumping but posture steady. The receptionist, Clara again, gave him a different look this time, curious, not dismissive. "6th floor," she said. Ms. DuPont's office is at the end of the hall. The elevator ride was quiet, the hum of machinery filling the silence. Quinton checked his breath, wiped his palms on his slacks, and knocked once on the heavy oak door. "Come in," came a voice, warm but direct that he stepped inside. The office was sleek but not cold, glass desk, neat stacks of papers, a single orchid in a white vase. Behind the desk sat the woman from the crosswalk, her charcoal blouse crisp, gold jewelry catching the light. Same chestnut bob, same calm confidence. "I was hoping it was you," she said, smiling. "Didn't know your name until 2 days ago, but I've been thinking about you." Quinton's throat went dry. "You're Miss DuPont?" "Marion." "Call me Marion," she said, standing to shake his hand. Her grip was firm, her eyes steady. "I had no idea," he said, his voice quieter than he meant. "You didn't." "I was late to a board meeting," she replied, her tone light but pointed. "But after I got my heel unstuck and got upstairs, I saw the security footage, you at the front desk, sweaty, looking wrecked. That kind of thing sticks with you." He laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "Not the first impression I was going for." "You made the right one," she said, gesturing to a chair. "I've interviewed 100 people for the analyst program. Most are forgettable, say the right things, wear the right shoes, but they don't do anything real." She leaned forward slightly. "I want to hear about you. No resume talk. Who are you?" Quinton took a breath, the air catching in his chest. Then he started. He told her about growing up in Sapulpa, where the air always smelled faintly of oil and cut grass. About losing his mom to cancer, dropping out of college to pay medical bills that still weren't settled. About applying to jobs with no callbacks, couch surfing, showing up at the workforce office every morning like it was his job. "I'm not trying to win points," he said, his voice steady now. "I just want to work. I want to contribute." Marion listened, her face unreadable, no notes, no glances at the clock. When he finished, she leaned back. "You ever worked with data?" "A little," he said. "Taught myself Excel on YouTube. Tracked bills, groceries, budget plans. Made a mock-up app for grocery stores once, tried to pitch it, but it didn't go anywhere." "Show me." He blinked. "What?" "Pull it up." She slid a sleek laptop across the desk. "You've got 10 minutes. His hands moved slowly at first, fumbling with the unfamiliar keyboard. He pulled up screenshots saved in his email drafts, tabs, charts, a clunky but functional app design. He walked her through it, explaining each function, his voice gaining confidence. She watched, silent, her eyes sharp but not unkind. When he finished, the room was quiet. "You built that with no training?" "Just trial and error," she asked, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Yes, ma'am. I like people who figure things out." She stood, extending her hand. "That'll be all for today." He stood too, unsure. No offer, no rejection, just a blank ending. "Thank you," he said, shaking her hand, his mind racing. As he walked out, a thought flickered, maybe this isn't about a job. Maybe she's testing something else. The air outside felt different, uncertain, like the story wasn't finished. Quinton walked down 6th Street, phone clutched in his hand, replaying every word, every look. Corey picked him up, asking, "How'd it go?" "I don't know, man," Quinton said, staring out the window. "I think it went good, but I can't tell if she was impressed or just testing me. Maybe both." That night, he sat at the kitchen table, still in his interview clothes, staring at a blank piece of paper. He wanted to write down everything, her words, her steady gaze, the questions she didn't ask, but it slipped through his mind like steam. Sleep didn't come, not from fear but from curiosity. Why reschedule? Why her, personally? Why end it so abruptly? The email came Friday morning, simple and direct. Subject, Thursday. From, Alora Finch. Ms. DuPont would like you to return Thursday at 1 p.m. She has something to show you. Bring nothing. Quinton read it 5 times, the words bring nothing echoing like a riddle. Thursday arrived, and he wore the same outfit, pressed clean, shoes shined, cuffs still holding. He arrived 10 minutes early, sitting in the lobby with his back straight, hands folded. At 1 p.m., the elevator dinged. Alora, a tall woman with sharp cheekbones and a clipboard, led him to a glass-walled conference room. Inside, Marion sat at the head of a long table, flanked by 2 men and a woman, all dressed in quiet wealth, tailored suits, watches that gleamed without ticking. Quinton's throat went dry. Come in, Marion said, gesturing to a seat. He sat, palms sweating under the table. This, Marion said, is not an interview. One of the men, graying at the temples, glanced at Quinton. We asked Marion to find someone who could think on their feet, show good judgment under pressure. She said she had someone in mind. Quinton's pulse quickened. Me? Marion nodded. That morning, you helped me. You had no reason to stop, you were late, you had something at stake. But you chose someone else's problem over your own risk. The woman to her left, her hair pulled into a sleek chignon, spoke. We run a community outreach arm within DuPont Grove. It's small but growing, partnerships with schools, local businesses, mentorship programs. We're expanding leadership, looking for people who understand struggle. Quinton leaned in, trying to keep up. So, is this a job? Not exactly, Marion said. It's a trial. 30 days, working with our outreach coordinator. Show us how you handle the day-to-day. If it works, we bring you on full-time. It's not about degrees, one of the men added, his voice low and steady. It's about instinct. You've already shown that. Quinton exhaled, the air leaving him in a slow rush. I'll do it, he said. All of it. Whatever you need. The room broke into smiles, subtle but real. Good, Marion said, standing and extending her hand. Report to Building B, back entrance, 8 a.m. Monday. This is yours to lose, Quinton Raye. He shook her hand, her grip as firm as before. But as he walked out, a chill ran through him. Yours to lose. The words felt like a promise and a warning, and he didn't know yet that this trial would test him in ways he couldn't imagine, or that someone in that room had already decided to make it harder. Quinton stepped into Building B just before 7:45 a.m., the back entrance creaking as it swung shut behind him. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of cardboard boxes and industrial cleaner. The room was a patchwork of organized chaos, long folding tables cluttered with donation bins, faded posters curling at the edges with slogans like Feed Tulsa and Jobs for All, and a whiteboard scrawled with schedules in 4 different colors of marker, a lopsided smiley face doodled next to Wednesday, youth meeting. Behind a cluttered desk stood a tall woman with copper curls tied back in a loose knot, her work boots scuffed and her faded maroon polo shirt slightly untucked. Thick-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, magnifying her hazel eyes as she looked up from a stack of papers. You must be Quinton, she said, standing and brushing her hands on her jeans. Her voice was warm but no nonsense, like someone who'd seen enough to skip small talk. Yeah, Quinton said, stepping forward. You're the outreach coordinator. That's me. Jessa Barron. 6 years here, long enough to know it's a wild ride. She extended a calloused hand, her grip firm, then gestured around the room. Welcome to home base. Looks like a tornado hit, but it works. You'll be shadowing me. We've got 4 partnerships this month: youth mentorship, senior meals, neighborhood cleanups, and Second Start. That last one's for folks like you, people trying to get back on their feet. Quinton raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching. Like me? No offense, Jessa said, cracking a grin that showed a chipped front tooth. It's a good thing. We need people who've lived it, who get it. She tossed him a clipboard. Let's move. The morning blurred into sorting donated clothes, musty sweaters and mismatched socks spilling from black trash bags, and answering calls from local schools about meal program updates. By noon, Quinton was hauling folding tables into the bed of Jessa's battered pickup, the metal edges cold against his palms as they rattled toward a rec center on 38th Street. The building was a squat brick structure with peeling paint and a basketball hoop bent at an odd angle. By 3 p.m., he was scrubbing graffiti off a chain-link fence with a dozen high school volunteers, the chemical tang of spray paint remover stinging his nose. The kids bantered, their voices cutting through the hum of traffic, and Quinton found himself laughing when a lanky teen named Marcus accidentally splattered paint on his own sneakers. It wasn't glamorous work, his back ached, his shirt clung to his skin with sweat, but it felt real, like he was part of something that mattered. Jessa worked him hard, no shortcuts, no coddling. She didn't talk much about Marion DuPont or the corporate office, just handed him tasks, stack these boxes, call this principal, rewrite this flyer, and watched how he handled them, her eyes sharp behind those glasses. She'd nod once, maybe mutter, not bad, then move on. That first week was a whirlwind of new faces and endless to-do lists. Quinton learned to build spreadsheets for tracking donations, draft grant updates in language that didn't sound like a robot wrote them, wrangle teenagers who'd rather scroll their phones than stack canned goods, and defuse arguments between community members who'd been burned by do-gooders one too many times. By Friday, his hands were raw, his notebook filled with scribbled tips, and he felt like he'd run a marathon in borrowed shoes, but by the second week, the ground shifted. On a rainy Tuesday, Jessa called in sick, her voice raspy over the phone. "Flu's kicking my ass," she croaked. "Your running point at second starts prep meeting today. Shelter on 22nd. Don't just follow the checklist, talk to them, hear them. I'm trusting you." Quinton nodded into the phone, his stomach tightening. "Got it." The second start shelter was a low, gray building with flickering fluorescent lights and a lobby that smelled of instant coffee and damp carpet. Quinton arrived early, his boots leaving wet prints on the linoleum. He shook hands with every resident who showed up, men with calloused palms, women with tired eyes, a teen with a hoodie pulled low over his face. He asked about their days, listened to complaints about the watery oatmeal, and sat quietly as a man named Vernon, his voice gravelly from years of smoking, told him about losing his house after one medical bill snowballed into a foreclosure. Vernon's hands shook as he spoke, his fingernails bitten to the quick, and Quinton felt a pang deep in his gut. He'd been one bad month from this himself, one missed rent check from being Vernon. After the meeting, Quinton helped stack chairs and sweep the floor, the broom's bristles scraping against the tiles. He jotted notes to relay to Jessa. Residents wanted more job workshops, better bus passes, a fix for the leaky bathroom sink. But the next day, as he sorted mail in Building B, a voice called his name. "Quinton. Conference room. Now." He turned to see a man in a tailored suit, his hair graying at the temples, holding a manila folder. Rodney Hales, one of the three from Marion's roundtable. Quinton followed him to a glass-walled room, the air cool and sharp with the scent of whiteboard markers. "Take a seat," Rodney said, flipping through the folder without looking up. Quinton sat, his hands resting on his thighs, unsure where this was going. Rodney closed the folder and met his eyes, his gaze cold and unyielding. "I want to be clear. This isn't a guaranteed job. You're here because Marion thinks there's something in you. That doesn't mean you've proven anything yet." Quinton nodded, keeping his face neutral. "I understand." Rodney leaned forward, his cufflinks glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Do you? Because what you're doing, showing up, smiling, lifting boxes, that's the easy part. Anyone can do that. What happens when things go sideways?" Quinton didn't answer right away. He knew this wasn't a resume question. "I adapt," he said finally, his voice steady. "I don't quit." Rodney studied him, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Good. Let's see if you mean that." He stood, dismissing Quinton with a curt nod. Quinton walked out, the words "go sideways" echoing in his head. He didn't know a test was already in motion, one that had nothing to do with folding tables or spreadsheets. The next morning, he arrived at Building B, the sky still dark and spitting rain. Jessa was still out, and a junior coordinator named Caden, a wiry kid in his early 20s with a buzz cut and a permanent smirk, lounged at the front desk, sipping a neon green energy drink. "Second start called," Caden said, not looking up from his phone. "Short on hands again. Said they asked for you specifically." Quinton nodded. "All right. I'll head there now." He grabbed a supply kit from the back, paper plates, hand sanitizer, printouts for the resource board, and caught the bus across town, the windows fogged with condensation. The shelter's lobby was tense when he arrived, the usual hum of conversation replaced by low whispers. The regular volunteers were nowhere in sight, and a few residents he'd met last week paced near the front desk, their faces tight with worry. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Vernon, clutching a clipboard, muttering under his breath. His flannel shirt was misbuttoned, and his eyes darted like he was waiting for bad news. "You all right?" Quinton asked, stepping closer. Vernon looked up, his voice low and urgent. "Man, they're about to throw out 3 people. Paperwork stuff, said they didn't sign forms from last month. But none of them got the forms in the first place." Quinton frowned. "Who said that?" Vernon jerked his head toward a back room. "New admin doesn't even know half our names." Quinton's gut twisted. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to step in. He wasn't staff, not really, but he couldn't walk away. He knocked on the office door and stepped inside. A young woman sat at a cluttered desk, her badge reading Tina Brost, admin coordinator. Mid-20s, with blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, she was typing furiously, her nails clicking against the keyboard. The room smelled of burnt coffee and printer ink. "Can I help you?" she asked, barely glancing up. "I heard there's an issue with some residents' paperwork," Quinton said, choosing his words carefully. "Yeah," Tina sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. 3 of them failed to update their eligibility forms. Supposed to be signed last month. No form, no stay. It's policy." Quinton paused, leaning slightly against the doorframe. "Do you know if they received the forms?" She stopped typing, her eyes narrowing. "Look, I just started here. I'm going off records. If it's not in the file, it doesn't exist." In the bottom drawer, buried under outdated brochures, was a battered logbook. He flipped through the pages, his fingers smudging the ink, until he found the names. 3 lines, all marked not applicable, forms not printed. He snapped a photo, printed a copy on the office's ancient printer, and handed it to Tina. She stared at the paper, her lips parting slightly. "I didn't know." "You do now," Quinton said, his tone even but firm. Tina didn't thank him, but she didn't argue either. By noon, the 3 residents had new forms, a fresh deadline to return them signed, and their spots secured. Vernon clapped Quinton on the back, his grip surprisingly strong. "Man, I don't know who you are, but you got it. We need more like you." Quinton smiled, brushing it off. He didn't tell Jessa, Caden, or Marion what happened. He hadn't done it for credit, he'd done it because he couldn't walk away. 2 days later, Marion called him to her office. The space felt different now, less intimidating but still heavy with authority. She sat behind her glass desk, her heels kicked off under the chair, a stack of grant proposals beside a mug of cold tea. "Tell me about Tuesday at Second Start," she said, her eyes unreadable. Quinton sat, the chair creaking faintly. "I got 3 calls yesterday," she continued, leaning forward. "One from the shelter director, one from the admin you confronted, and one from a resident named Vernon." He kept his voice steady. "They were going to push people out over forms they never got. I didn't think that was right." "It wasn't," Marion said. "You did the right thing. That's not why you're here." He blinked. "It's not." She leaned back, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I wanted to see if you'd mention it." "You didn't, not to Jessa, not to Caden, not to anyone." "I didn't think I needed to," Quinton said, his hands resting on his knees. "That's what impressed me." She stood, walking slowly to the window, her silhouette sharp against the Tulsa skyline. Most people, especially when they're being tested, feel the need to broadcast every win. You handled it and moved on. Quinton shifted, the words sinking in. It wasn't about me. It was about them. Exactly. The pause that followed wasn't awkward, just heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. I didn't bring you here for charity, Quinton, she said, turning to face him. I brought you here because we need people who understand why this work matters, not just how to do it. He searched her face for a catch, but found none. So what now? She walked back to her desk, pulled a folder from a drawer, and set it in front of him. You know what our community branch looks like on the ground. What you haven't seen is how we build from the inside. He opened the folder, blueprints, schedules, grant proposals for a new program called Lift Tulsa, a citywide partnership between DuPont Grove and 3 local organizations. We're launching this in 3 months, she said. We need someone who can bridge both sides, the boardroom and the street. Someone who can walk into a bank at 10 a.m. and a food pantry at 3 p.m. and not change who they are. Quinton raised an eyebrow, his fingers tracing the folder's edge. You want me to run it? Not yet, she said, her voice firm but kind. That'd be too much, too fast. But I want you in the room, learning strategy, funding, people management. I want to build you up for something bigger. He stared at the folder, the weight of it grounding him. This doesn't feel real. I know, she said, her smile softening. It didn't for me either when I got my first shot. But someone gave it to me. I'm giving it to you. Quinton closed the folder, his mind racing. Then she said something that caught him off guard. You're going to meet people who underestimate you. Some won't say it, but you'll feel it. They'll wonder if you belong. Every time they question it, they're telling on themselves, not you. His throat tightened. He didn't know how to respond, but she wasn't done. Her voice dropped, quieter now. I've been in rooms where I was the only woman, where the money talked over me and the power ignored me. I stopped waiting for approval. So should you. He looked up, the question burning. Why me, though? Marion walked around the desk, leaning against its edge, her arms crossed. Because when I was stuck on that sidewalk in heels I regret buying, looking helpless, you didn't hesitate. You didn't ask who I was. You just helped. A beat passed, her eyes steady. That tells me more than any resume ever could. Quinton stood, the folder tucked under his arm. I'm in. All in. She extended her hand, not a test this time but a promise. Good. We start Monday real work. Planning sessions, partner meetings, strategy calls. Bring questions. Bring opinions. He laughed, a small release of tension. I've got both. Then we're in business. As Quinton walked out, the Oklahoma sun warm on his face, it hit him, this wasn't just a second chance. It was the first real one. But not everyone at DuPont Grove believed he belonged, and someone was already sharpening their doubts into a weapon. The following Monday, Quinton arrived at DuPont Grove's headquarters at 7:50 a.m., not in work boots or jeans but in a crisp navy shirt and slacks Jessa had helped him pick from a thrift store. Time they see what you already know, she'd said, winking as she adjusted his collar. The lobby's marble floors gleamed, and the air carried the faint scent of coffee and printer toner. Today, he wasn't shadowing or hauling boxes, he was part of the Lift Tulsa planning team, sitting at a table with people who had titles, budgets, and expectations. The West Conference room was sleek, with polished walnut tables, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Tulsa's modest skyline, and a projector humming softly in the ceiling. Marion stood at the front, leading the presentation, her charcoal suit sharp and her voice commanding. Beside her, a clean-cut man in a tailored blazer clicked through slides, Rodney Hales. He didn't acknowledge Quinton's entrance, his eyes fixed on the screen, but Quinton felt the weight of his presence like a cold draft. Marian began, her voice cutting through the room's quiet hum. Our goal is to launch Lift Tulsa with 2 pillars, job training and community housing. We're partnering with 3 organizations, matching them with internal teams. This isn't just outreach, it's investment. She turned to the table, her gaze landing on Quinton. I've asked Quinton Raye to join these meetings because he's been doing the work quietly for weeks. His insights matter here. The room shifted, stiff smiles, a few raised eyebrows. Rodney's pen tapped rhythmically against his notepad. Quinton sat straighter, his notebook open, pen poised. He stayed quiet at first, absorbing the rhythm, pitches on training modules, debates over timelines, adjustments to budgets. But when the discussion turned to outreach, he cleared his throat. Can I say something? The room stilled. Marian nodded, her expression neutral. Most of the people we're trying to help don't trust institutions, Quinton said, his voice steady but deliberate. They've been promised fixes before, but those folks usually vanish by week 2. If this is gonna work, we can't just send flyers or build a shiny website. We've got to show up, over and over, until it feels like a relationship, not charity. A woman across the table, her hair in a sleek bob, nodded thoughtfully, jotting a note. Another man adjusted his glasses, considering. Rodney, however, leaned forward, his voice smooth but edged. Quinton, I appreciate the sentiment, but this is a high-budget initiative. We can't center everything on soft trust building. There are deadlines, deliverables. Quinton didn't flinch. Then we're building something that'll crumble the second we leave. Rodney's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, glancing at Marian. She smiled faintly. That's exactly why he's here. After the meeting, as the room cleared, Rodney caught Quinton by the coffee table, his voice low. You're walking a fine line. Marian's backing you now, but eventually, people will ask what makes you qualified to be here. Quinton met his gaze, his voice calm but firm. Maybe they should ask what made you forget why this place was built. Rodney's smile was cold, his coffee cup tapping once against the table before he walked away. Quinton didn't tell Marian, he wasn't here for office politics. He was here for people like Vernon, the mother with 2 kids, the teen on the shelter patio. That week, he dove into the work, budget sessions where he learned how grants were sliced and diced, afternoons mapping neighborhoods for Wi-Fi hotspots and job fairs, late nights rewriting intake forms for clarity. One evening, locking up Building B, he caught his reflection in the glass door, same face, same eyes, but standing taller, like he was finally claiming space. But while Quinton poured himself into the work, someone was digging through his past, looking for a crack to exploit. It came to a head on a quiet Thursday evening. He'd just wrapped a meeting at the rec center, the youth mentorship program now funded and prepped for its pilot. The gym smelled of rubber mats and sweat, and Quinton stayed late to lock up, the keys jangling in his pocket as he walked back to Building B to drop off signed forms. On his desk, tucked under his keyboard, was a folded envelope, no name, no note. Inside, a printout of his arrest record from 2 years ago, an unpaid parking ticket that spiraled into a suspended license, then an overnight in county jail after a traffic stop during a delivery job. He'd explained it in past interviews, but most employers stopped reading there. He stared at the paper, his jaw tight, heart slowing to a heavy thud. Then he tucked it into his folder and walked to Marian's office. She was still there, heels off, reading grants with a mug of cold tea. He handed her the envelope. She scanned it, her expression unchanging. I figured this might come up eventually, she said. You knew? Quinton asked, his voice low. HR flagged it. I overruled them. Why didn't you ask me about it? Because I wanted to see who you are now, not who you were on paper. Her tone sharpened. But someone clearly wants this to matter more than it should. I'll find out who. Quinton stood still, the old weight creeping back, the fear that this was where it ended. I don't want trouble. I just want to work. Marion shook her head, standing and pulling a file from a cabinet. You think this disqualifies you? Let me show you something. She dropped the file on her desk, its pages yellowed. When I was 24, I nearly lost my business over a loan I co-signed for someone who vanished. Debt collectors showed up at my office. I sat in a courtroom next to my mother, praying the judge wouldn't take everything. She met his eyes. You want to build something that matters, Quinton, expect people to test your past. But they don't define your future. You do. He exhaled, the weight easing slightly. So what now? Now you get back to work. I'll handle the rest. The next morning, Rodney Hales was reassigned to a different department in another state, no explanation given. Quinton didn't ask, and Marion didn't offer. The tension that had shadowed him vanished, and the work accelerated. Lift Tulsa launched on schedule. Quinton was named assistant coordinator within 3 weeks, then full coordinator 3 months later. He managed teams, met with city leaders, and returned to Second Start, not as a volunteer but as a partner shaping its future. At a press event one afternoon, a journalist asked what changed everything for him. Quinton smiled, the answer clear. A stuck heel. The crowd chuckled, but he meant it. After the cameras left, he walked to the sidewalk on Elm and 14th, staring at the crack where it all began. He thought of Mr. Lawton's loaned coins, Corey's gas money, Jessa's thrift store wisdom, people who gave what they could. And he thought of those who wouldn't stop to help unless a spotlight was on them. Kindness isn't supposed to be convenient, he told himself. It's supposed to be true. On his way back, he passed 2 teens arguing on a corner. One dropped a folder, papers scattering. Without thinking, Quinton bent down, gathered them, and handed them back. Thanks, man, the kid said, nodding. No problem, Quinton said, walking away. Because helping when no one's watching, that's who he was.